Okay, I think that's about all the time we need. Hello to everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's Columbia Business School Executive Education webinar. My name is Matthew Monagle, and I'm the web manager here at Columbia Business School. And before we get started, I want to run through just a few housekeeping tips. We're going to be having about 20 minutes of content and then about 10 minutes of Q&A at the very end. So we would encourage you to ask questions using the Q&A box on your screen as they come to mind. We'll make sure we circle around back to them at the very end. We will also be providing a full recording of this webinar in about 3 to 5 business days after today's talk. So I know that's always a concern. If you have to jump out a little early, don't worry about it. We'll make sure you get a recording of this. And then finally, if you are someone who uses social media and you'd like to follow along there, please be sure to use the CBS ExecEd hashtag, that's CBS ExecEd, and we'll be sharing your thoughts with our audience. So today we're going to be talking about prototyping, and our faculty director today is R.A. Farrokhnia. He teaches the From Idea to Prototype in 5 Days program, which runs May 1st to 5th here at Columbia University campus. And I'm going to let him talk a little bit about himself and some of the material that he has to present today. But Professor Farrokhnia, welcome.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it. Good day, everybody. Thanks so much for joining in, and appreciate you giving me 20, 30 minutes of your time during your perhaps lunch break, or if you're overseas, during even other times. So the topic I wanted to discuss with you today kind of came from our experience and my research and conversations around all ingredients that go into a product sprint, i.e. bringing an idea to reality within 5 days. In that context, specifically, I wanted to discuss with you today the role of teams and how some of the best organizations that we have seen have gone in creating and forming and managing these top performing teams. Now, obviously, there is a ton of literature in this space around how companies go about managing high performing teams and such. And in our analysis and our work, we noticed that certain times we are deploying these best, quote unquote, best practices. And at best, they have, at times they have zero effect, or at worst, they have the opposite of intended effect. And it was kind of perplexing to us. So as opposed to give you, generalities around, top performing team creation and management and so on, I'll try to the best I can to stay away from generalities and give you specific examples and best practices, with the hope that you will be able to learn some of these methodologies and be able to adapt and customize it for your own reality in your company or in your work. So within that setting, I'll discuss team formation and management in settings in which you have to deliver innovation, whether as a startup or a big company you're trying to bring about disruption or bring an idea to reality without having a ton of resources and such. I'll talk specifically about Google's 5 ingredients or 5 main methodologies they have noticed top performing teams have. And I'll bring in some other best practices from other entities such as NASA, Navy SEALs, and even Liverpool Football Club. And lastly, throughout the conversation, I try to pepper the conversation with as much info as I can, such that you have enough intellectual capital with you so you can deploy these for your specific setting. So a little bit about myself. I teach at Columbia Schools of Business and Engineering. That's how you pronounce my last name, for those of you interested. I'm also an executive director at the Dean's Office, launching an interdisciplinary program that sits at the intersection of engineering, business, design, and storytelling called CUBE. Proud recipient of Dean's Award for Teaching Excellence. I'm on the board of Knight Badgett program at the School of Journalism. And I'm a senior lecturer there, trying to break silos and connect the dots across campus and beyond. And lastly, I'm a founder of a development lab, in which a lot of the best practices discussed today is coming from that lab, i.e. we are not just about theory, but also about deploying those and bringing them to reality in practice. And in fact, if you were to define me, I always like to say I like to sit at the intersection of academia and practice. That's where most of the fun actually happens. And within each of those realms, a certain sub-realm, some of the sub-realms that you see on your screen. And all of this is in the service of this endeavor of us trying to look at innovation and some new ways of doing things and creating new products and new services and being able to bring them to reality. Obviously, to accomplish that, what we need is truly top-performing multidisciplinary teams that can innovate within high constraints and high uncertainty settings. And these constraints could be anything from budget, from time, from the pool of talent you have access to. And obviously, every time you try to do something new or innovative, there's a lot of high uncertainty involved with it. And along with that goes your corporate culture, acceptance of failure, and the notion of responsible failure, and so on and so forth. And all of this, in short, is what we referred to earlier as sprint, i.e. teams that can bring ideas to reality within a short period of time, leveraging all the best that's out there. And that's a topic of a course I'll be teaching in May at Exec Ed at Columbia Business School as well. So I would venture to say that the first and most important ingredient for a top-performing team, whether within a sprint setting or in general, is truly to ensure that the team has the right mindset. In other words, being able to think big thoughts and bring them to reality. And those of you who may have seen some of my prior lectures and such know I'm quite fond of this term called imagineering. Most likely you have heard this term before, and it's associated, or coined rather, by a Fortune 500 company. And in case you have Disney, you're partly right, but you're mostly wrong, because back in the days, actually back in 1940s, Alcoa, of all companies, coined the term imagineering. And I found an actual ad that appeared in February 1942 issue of Time magazine, in which they showcase imagineering. And I really like the way they defined it. Obviously, it's too small for you to read. I highlighted the right part, but they defined imagineering as letting your imagination soar and then engineering down to earth. And as I alluded to earlier, I'm quite fond of this description, because it's exactly what we strive to do at my development lab, all my teaching at Columbia, and all the practical things that we do. But some of the best companies, whether startups or big companies that we've seen, have this pretty much embedded in their DNA. They try to think big thoughts and be able to innovate and disrupt, but also not just get bound by thinking big, but how to make it reality given the realities and the constraints that they are facing. So, having the right mindset is obviously super critical. But after that, what are other ingredients that are necessary that we have seen at best companies and we try to implement on our own that can lead you to that? Obviously, high output teams that learn fast. I know that this sounds a bit general, so I try to get deeper into this. Whenever you are in a better startup or corporate setting, I'm sure you all know the composition and the quality of a team matters. And there are ways you could isolate for certain characteristics through which you could identify and recruit these high potential leaders and team members. A lot of these topics, are covered in my class, and you can look up, for example, lean user research and adapt it for recruiting purposes, where first and foremost you would observe as opposed to ask for the characteristics and traits you're trying to isolate and hire for. Some of the companies, some of the entities I mentioned before, such as Navy SEALs or NASA, aviation pilots, these are highly trained individuals in which you need to have a really good combination of a skill-based learning versus cognition-based, i.e. you can, through repetition and practice, they will learn certain skills necessary to perform their job, but their job varies enough and has uncertainty embedded into his day-to-day enough that you want someone who can also think on their feet, so to speak, and be able to improvise and do what they need to get the job done. So knowing what to train for and knowing what to hire for is critical. There are elements that you could codify and through which you can learn and control and kind of recruit such that you at least have the right ingredients to start with. And again, knowing what you need to recruit for right up front is critical, whether it's independence or high dependability or least amount of supervision and so on. And so if you put some thought into that, finding these teams, high output teams, becomes much faster and better. And the importance of cross-disciplinary or interdisciplinary teams, the fact that its diversity really does matter, and having different thought points within the same team when it comes to discussion or ideation or actual execution is really critical. So within that context, the team that also do quite well are those that think for themselves individually and independently, but also collaborate and ideate within team setting, because you want each team member not only to learn and be able to pursue continuous learning on their own without being prompted, but also be able to share that learning with team members and be able to bring and create best practices across the team. The other characteristics we identified as quite important is, again, this notion of connecting disparate dots, the ability to see beyond the obvious. This becomes quite important, especially in smaller settings, smaller company settings, but also requires that you create the culture and environment in which people have access to a lot of knowledge and are encouraged to seek out information such that they acquire these points to connect later. And the best practice I can advise is just read as much as you can and read as eclectically as you can, and create this culture within the team setting such that team members will also spend time reading. Some of the best companies I've seen literally have reading time in which all team members sit in a room and they're just flipping through newspapers and magazines and journals and online news sites and so on, whether general or technical. And once it becomes embedded in your culture, it really leads to exponential benefits down the line. The other important ingredient is this comfort and the ability to do iterative experimentation, testing, learning, and repeating the process, but with accountability built into it. By that, it means, I alluded to earlier in the talk, the concept of responsible failure, i.e., failure should be acceptable within, innovative company culture, but you just don't want to fail for the sake of failing. Failing, as long as it's, you learn from it and you figure out, all right, this process didn't work. What are the reasons for it? What can we do differently? And you try to create a log of those failure points. So after a while, there is a good library of these notions within the company, and revisiting them from time to time is always a good practice. So accountability within firms is quite important, whether for team members as well as team leaders. For example, in my classes, the students all rate each other, and they rate me, and I rate teams. So everyone pretty much rates everybody. And within Google various groups, even for simple things such as admission, there is a lot of accountability baked into this notion in which team members rate each other and everyone else. And also using buddy system is quite useful, using burn down charts as opposed to traditional, done versus not done, which is quite binary way of measuring outcomes. So you can look up into agile methodology, and that really works. It's kind of gradual way of kind of seeing how far you are in your process and where you are now at the moment, and where do you need to go such that you can meet your time and budget. The reward mechanisms also quite fascinating to look into. A lot of organizations generally reward and punish people based on outcomes of a decision, not the quality of a decision. In general, you hope that good decisions would lead to good outcomes, but the causal link pretty much rests on probabilities, not certainties. So understanding how you could reward not just the outcome, but the process that leads to it, it's quite fascinating. And Amazon has done a very interesting job at it, such that they would avoid getting stuck in sort of a conservative, risk-avoiding behavior, especially in teams that need to innovate. Operating in high uncertainty was also a common thread. At times you can kind of anticipate what could happen, and you could even assign probabilities to it, kind of the proverbial known unknowns. But a lot of times you're dealt with this situation of unknown unknowns. Not only you can't fully grasp what could happen, you can't even begin to think of probabilities. assigned to such unknown occurrences. So you can run weighted average risk-reward metrics and figure out what needs to get done. So teams that are comfortable with this setting and they don't see it as an impediment, but rather a challenge, that's also quite good. And as I alluded to, this notion of known unknowns, and understanding what are your operating parameters of your operating envelope is, and decode it and know what you can control and what you cannot control, and still forge ahead. That's quite a powerful skill we saw across all these companies that I talked about. All of the teams that we saw, even our own little case, we're always resource constraints, and we celebrate that because that brings about, I think, it brings about the best of creativity and innovation, because you're trying to hack a solution given the limited tools you have at your disposal, on always having the goal in mind, and also understanding that the initial phase of each project is the most fun, where people are ideating and a lot of ideas get put on the board. That's always fantastic, but when it comes to execution, that's where things tend to die down. So you want to make sure you maintain the energy. The burn down chart I alluded to earlier, that's also helpful in this regard. Also, all these teams and all these entities, you're operating within fairly complex scenarios. Sometimes the outcome of your work is mission critical with a lot of moving parts. Again, not being scared by it, but celebrating it, understanding and having a good roadmap, all the things that are happening now, all the things that need to happen to get you to your goal. It's also very important. Every company that we looked at, there is this notion of high interdependency within the organization, meaning that the team you're assigned to or the team that you're leading cannot work in isolation, will have to work with other groups within the company, and most, if not all of those, may not move at the same speed as you are. So creating, and the fact that they are not working for you, that adds another layer of complexity, because you have not a whole lot of power over them to convince them to move at your speed. Obviously, that's a challenge, but some of the companies that you've seen figure out good ways to coax and have others come in and help them achieve their goals. And this notion of manager time versus maker time, this is very critical, especially for team leaders, understanding that maker time, the creative time that's get devoted to these projects, is quite unstructured. It could happen any point in time, just like the fact that you might be able to sit on it. You have to write a memo. You could be sitting on your computer for like 3 days, nothing comes to mind, and then in the span of 15 minutes, you produce the best memo that has ever been. Versus manager time, which is the time you devote managing people, reporting to people, people report to you, and you run meetings, client meetings, and so on. This is highly structured, comes in neatly packaged 30-minute on an hour time frame. So creating the right mix of maker time and manager time also was another major ingredient we saw in companies that have been quite successful. And lastly, this notion of failure of imagination, meaning that it's impossible for you to set the strategy and the goals of the team without being able to anticipate, or at least have the imagination to anticipate all the things that can or cannot happen, and being able to create this kind of decision trees and how much importance you want to give to one versus the other, and which path you want to pursue as well. So in terms of all of this, and for example, how Google codifies these rules, with the disclaimer that obviously Google is a fairly engineering-driven company, and certain metrics that they measure are quite tangible to measure versus others. After all, figuring out the output of an engineer versus a designer, I would argue, is a little bit easier. It's better to understand what program does the job well and code is elegant and so on, versus determining if a design is good or bad is less subjective. So first, Google, so having done a lot of research, and they're very good at identifying trends and recognizing patterns within the company, they were perplexed by this notion that they would see a team of A+ star engineers performing worse than a team of average engineers. And they looked at a lot of different metrics, figuring out within their companies, can they identify and codify what it takes to create a successful team? What are the ingredients needed? So I'll run through these, and hopefully during Q&A, I'll be happy to respond to more questions. One was this notion of psychological safety. For the company, they said this is the most important thing to them. And again, there's a lot of literature on these. You can read on your own if you're interested. And this is not just, everyone sitting around a table and singing Kumbaya, but none of that. It's just a matter of it's okay to take risks and be vulnerable. And it's a really fascinating topic within the field of psychology and management. If you're interested, I encourage you to watch this, to listen to this podcast, Invisibilia's June 17, 2016, in which they go over this episode back in the mid-90s of how an oil rig company, which it's super macho culture, was able to create a much better outcome and let's safer work environment with better productivity through this through this notion of creating a safe environment for their employees. Notion number 2 was dependability and learning individually and collectively that I alluded to earlier. Team members, they know they can rely on each other and they can support each other. That's was quite powerful. Having specific roles, plans, execution goals, and actual end goal in mind in a kind of a clear way in which everyone is on the same page was also critical. The notion of meaning of work being done, that the fact that each team member is working on something that actually leads to an outcome they all believe in was very important. And lastly, impact and mission. The notion of 4 and 5, we can summarize it in the notion of mission plus vision. And this is especially for millennials, holds very much true. They're not just, like you can't tempt them purely with money or financial rewards. They would want a lot more. So in conclusion, learning and training the right teams and the right team members and learning as a team collectively is quite powerful. And one last common thread I'd like to share with you is the notion of constant learning and proactive learning, and the fact that repetition doesn't bring about the best in learning. So I'll leave you with this final anecdote. I'm sure you all remember the story of U.S. Air Flight 1549 that landed in Hudson River. So here you have the situation in which the plane landed in water, the water landing, and I'm sure all the passengers, and I'm sure all of you have heard the safety announcements at every flight you're on, and you pretty much know it by heart, how to buckle your seatbelt or put on your life vest or put on the air mask and so on. But on this flight that landed in water, out of 150 passengers on board, only 33 came out of the plane with a life vest on, and only 10 did it on their own. The rest were given. And out of all of these, only 4 had put it on correctly, i.e. over their head and also fastening the strap around their waist. And if you look at the picture, you only see a few people actually have something like that around their neck. So this notion of that the fact that repetition doesn't bring to bring learning, you need to be able to create the right environment and this game scenario analysis and such that the best learning is achieved. So with that, I thank you for your time and attention. I encourage you to read again as much as you can. Here, my contact info is on the slide that you see. Feel free to email me should you have any questions or need any clarifications. In case you're interested in the sprint class that I mentioned, you can check us out at any of these links. You can just Google FIP at Columbia from idea to prototype. You'll come up, you're the first link. And with that, I'll pass it on to Matt for Q&A.
Great, Professor Farrokhnia, thank you so much. We've got quite a few questions coming in, so I just want to remind everyone to use the Q&A box to go ahead and ask them. We'll take questions on anything that's related to the content. And so to start us off today, one of our listeners, Maximiliano, asks about the framework. I'm sure there are many to choose from, some that work well, some that maybe don't work so well. Do you have any guidance as to where people can start if they need to see sort of their blueprint of where to start implementing this process?
Yes, the best way to do it is to actually reverse engineer the process, meaning first look at the realities of the setting you're in, large company versus small, risk tolerant or not, what the company culture is, what's your budget like, what are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to innovate the company from within, right from a get-go? Are you working on a smaller project? Is it a physical application, a digital application? If you work on those first, then you have a much easier time figuring out, the best starting point. I always say the leap from, idea to execution is literally a phone call away. So as long as you have those parameters in mind, there are good resources online that can help you get started, but again, none of it is really rocket science. They're fairly easy to set up. And if you email me, Maximilian, I'll be happy to dig deeper into this a little bit more and help you get started.
So we have another question that just came in from Jason, which I think is really great. How do you know when you're ready to start something like this? Is there a way for you to get a feel for the structure of your organization to begin this process? Is it something that you just mentioned, reverse engineering, that maybe you should just implement and then wait until the organization catches up?
Yes, great question indeed. In general, we come to a realization that people, well, obviously not everyone moves at the same speed in terms of the creativity output, in terms of the willingness to do something creative and so on. But people in general respond well to something they can see and touch. So as opposed to sitting and talking about this innovative product you want to bring about and create within the company, or you're hearing your customers clamoring for this product and so on and so forth. So as opposed to talk about it or perhaps create a PowerPoint out of it, create a prototype and then show it to people. And this prototype doesn't have to be the full-fledged product. I mean, we create prototypes without any back end built into it, but it looks and feels as if it's a real product. And when you show this around to people within the company, especially senior executives, you get a whole different reaction because all of a sudden the vision is realized. They can see it, they can interact with it, they can ask questions. So you shouldn't wait for your organization to catch up, because I can guarantee you, just by the virtue of you being on this call, you probably are one of those faster thinkers that like to move at a higher speed than your organization as a whole. So I would encourage you to start thinking about actually implementing what you have in mind, as opposed to wait for the organization, and have something tangible to show.
So Luis asks, specific to a couple of different industries, but maybe you work in an industry that's a little bit more static, that they haven't changed a lot, such as the manufacturing industry, where things have been pretty much going the same for the last 100 years or so. How do you choose apart or break the entire organization into pieces where you can begin to play with the idea of rapid prototyping?
Yes, we interact, for better or worse, with a good number of companies that are exactly in this space. For a long time, they have been able to squeeze a lot of economic rents from doing the same thing over and over again. But obviously, in today's today's environment and today's age, in terms of how fast things are moving, they are kind of caught off guard. And continuing doing things the old-fashioned way will no longer do it. But so they understand they need to move forward with innovation, but the thinking is still fairly slow, and there's a lot of lethargic and inertia within the company. So in this case, you want to hack the process in your favor a little bit, meaning that you want to pick the few battles that not only need to be fought, but those that you feel you have a higher probability of winning those. And once you can show even a small incremental improvement in the outcomes, then you have the ears and attention of the senior managers and decision makers, especially those who control the purses and the budgets. So think about what really matters to the company as a whole. Think about what you can do within the constraints that you have, everything from budget to team members and so on and so forth, and see what you can execute within those timeframes and bring it up to the attention of the right people. And be prepared to hear no all the time. The default answer to anything new is always no. But ability to go around those no's, that's more art than science. And I highly encourage all of you to pursue that. Don't get discouraged by no's.
Now, we have some more questions coming in, and Professor Farrokhnia has actually agreed to stick around. So please continue. We're going to take an extra 5-10 minutes and get to some of these, because there's some good ones and we want to address them. Another one that just came in is from Felipe. Talking about earlier, you mentioned the research that Google has done into their teams and what makes teams successful. Starting out, are there some easy carrots that you can put in place to maybe incentivize your employees to want to participate in a prototyping sprint?
Yes. First and foremost, identify which of your team members are actually more open to this. Again, I alluded to this to the question prior, that you can hack the process a little bit. I'm sure all of those of you who manage many people, you can already identify 2, 3, 4 individuals within your organization that are a lot more open to this, i.e. people who would do things on their own time, nights and weekends, projects they pursue because they're passionate, or people who are just more entrepreneurial minded. So, identify those first, and you have a much easier time getting the buy-in, because they already pretty much bought into this whole notion by themselves. So that team will be critical at the beginning to to start off your innovation project you have in mind, and then you can deploy some of the learnings that I shared with in terms of Google. Set the right culture right from a get-go. You can say, well, you can create the right environment in which they feel protected, especially you as the higher manager, higher level manager. The fact that you can fail within this entity, you can keep it under wraps, so the risks, the reputational risk is obviously lowered as well. So create the right team first, and then you can truly create go through the 5 ingredients that I mentioned at Google. But again, understand that Google's culture is kind of unique to Google. Not every company wants to be Google, but vast majority of them can never be it, because Google, it's the amalgamation of many different points in their culture that made them who they are today. But that doesn't mean you can't try. Trying under small settings is always good, and once you have tangible outcomes you can share with others, slowly, the organization will come around, and you can win more champions within. And just like every time, just like the same way you would launch a new product, you have certain early adopters, and you have some people who will resist at first, and then after a while, everyone will come on board. The same process happens inside a company. Just make sure people don't steal your credit, and upper managers know of your good efforts. Where you do this incremental ask. You don't go to them, ask for a big budget, big team right off the get-go. See what you can create with the resources you have, like building a collage kind of thing.
So we had a question from Turkey about team members that might be afraid of new technologies. And I know that especially in a small organization, they might want to go with the quick movers, the early adopters, the people that'll be into the prototyping idea. Is it worth investing the resources and getting team members that might not be interested in this on board for these as well? Or do you want to kind of wait until you've got something that you can demonstrate and then bring that back to some of the people that might be more resistant?
Yeah, I would recommend the second approach based on all the empirical and anecdotal evidence we have seen at other companies, or even our own little company, our little lab rather. Here I'm fortunate that all the team members are quite well versed in tech, and they're quite innovative, so we have less of an issue there. But still, certain times you hear resistance, especially when you have little control over the teams that you're given. You rarely have the luxury of selecting all the team members in your organization from the get-go. So lowering the barrier to entry, if you will, is always good. So if you know of individuals who would be open to this, go for it. If you don't, I can guarantee you, your company will have some of those people. You just have to find them, and finding them is best based on observation as opposed to asking. For instance, you can put a flyer out and say, hey, I want to run an ideation session. I'm going to buy free pizza for everyone. Who wants to join? We're just going to do this after hours. So you create a little barrier that perhaps people want to go home and be with their family or watch television or whatever. But if someone actually shows up, that means that this person is quite interested. And the fun or the possibility of ideating on a new product or working on something new is more interesting to them than watching television. So that's a good way you could isolate for certain characteristics. And obviously the sky is the limit from where you can go from there.
So Carlos asks what's probably the most important question too, which is, it's a great idea for you to be able to have these failures, but how do you have processes in place that ensure that you're learning from them, that you're getting results that you can measure, that you can replicate, that you might be able to do something with, as opposed to just saying, all right, that didn't work, and starting the process over from scratch? How do you really make sure that you have a good process for failure?
Yes, obviously, it's a very fascinating topic that I would love to be able to run another session on this, but on this alone. But measuring metrics from the get-go, and I'm sorry, establishing success metrics from the get-go and measuring them along the way, it's a very powerful tool in the sense that you kind of know where you are now, and you kind of see the destination ahead of you because that's, you set that goal. But the path to that destination is never a straight path. You can zigzag back and forth, up or down, until you get to that destination. So if you set the metrics right from a get-go, saying that, for instance, okay, we need to develop this app, and we need to do it within these 5 days and this much budget. Day 3, you hit a roadblock and realize, oh shoot, we're gonna miss our deadline. Well, once you do your post briefing, and the military and all these tech companies I mentioned do a good job at it, in what is called a pre-briefing, i.e. setting the goals correctly and not just doing things for the sake of doing them, but doing them rather in this kind of incremental way to this big goal. And as they're going through the process, the key team members keep everyone informed. And once you get to the end, you do this post briefing, meaning that you do a look back, kind of see what went wrong that impeded you from reaching your goal within time and budget you set out. And was that something outside your control or within your control? Could it have been predicted or not? And each of those answer to each of those questions will determine how you would create a log of these events. And if it's something inside your control, hopefully you can learn from it and be able to prevent it from happening in the future again. And if it's not, what could you have possibly done to anticipate this? So creating a good log of all these outcomes and events is quite powerful, because we are in the habit of repeating the same mistakes over and over again. But if you log it and you constantly go back to it, you become more conscious of it, and hopefully you will not repeat the same mistakes.
And finally, I think we have time for one more question, which I think kind of gets to the heart of a few of the questions I still see remaining in the queue. You had mentioned earlier that it is important to read eclectically. So what are some of the places that you go to for inspiration for this? Do you like to look at corporate white papers? Do you have a couple of different websites or blogs that you like to read? Can you make a couple of recommendations to the people listening?
Well, whoever asks this question should get some bonus points, because that's a question I always encourage my students and team members to ask from whoever they interact with, because most likely some of the names I'm going to give you in terms of publications are going to be the usual suspects. But it's possible that if you keep asking this question from a lot of people in the field you're interested in, you might hit upon that gem of a blog or this obscure publication that no one has heard about. So obviously we read the usuals, the Journal, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and the Financial Times. I have a team that helps me go through a lot of research, academic research, whether it's management or engineering, or first certain fields we are interested in, things like machine learning, neural network, computer science in general, management, and so on. Hacker News is also a good source. I would encourage you to check out. And some even general publications, and not just trade journals. Also, those are also good. I like long form reading, which nowadays with short attention span that people have might be a tough sell. But business publications such as Business Week or Bloomberg, those are quite good. A lot of good ideas came to us from that. And lastly, just interacting with people in the field, whether they're researchers or practitioners. It's quite useful. And obviously, I'm a bit privileged being at Columbia. We have a lot of resources at our disposal here, but you'll be surprised how easy it is to get a lot of info if you just ask. You can sometimes just call up. You read something interesting in a journal. You just contact a reporter if you want to learn more, and be surprised how much more information or leads you're given that you can pursue on your own. But feel free to email me, and if you have any specific field, and I'll be happy to send you more specific suggestions of what we would humbly suggest you read.
Great. Well, Professor, thank you so much for joining us today, and for all of you that attended and asked so many great questions. We really appreciate it. You guys are what make these webinars go, so we're always excited to be able to give you a chance to connect one-on-one with our faculty. As a reminder, Professor Farrokhnia is going to be teaching from idea to prototype in 5 days here on the Columbia campus from May 1st to 5th. And if you want a chance between now and then to go over this video and look, familiarize yourself again with some of the information, as a reminder, we'll make sure you have that in about 3 to 5 business days. If you're on this email list, we'll send it to you directly, so don't worry. Just one last note before we head out. Some of the upcoming webinars we have, we're going to be here with Professor Grant Ackerman on April 11th. He'll be talking about best practices in leadership. And on May 3rd, we'll have Professor Hitendra Wadhwa here to talk about the new science of relationships. So keep an eye out for some of the additional executive webinar series entries that we'll be talking about in the next couple of weeks. But again, Professor Farrokhnia, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thanks to everyone for attending.